The old choice, Matthew 7:13 and 14, the straight, S-T-R-A-I-T, the difficult, the narrow, the windy, hard to navigate path leads to life. Few are willing to make that choice. But then you've got that other one. It's wide and it's open and it's easy to travel quite often, but it leads to destruction. Don't quit or don't give up on Christianity because you fear being beaten up by the world. It's not worth living an easy life now, comparatively speaking, but one that ends in destruction. And living that life now as opposed to living a life that, sometimes will be hard. Let's not be naive. Let's not try to hide the facts. Sometimes it will be difficult. Jesus says in Luke 14:25-33, we got to be willing to count the cost. We got to be willing to put him before our own desires and needs. Don't give up on Christianity, whether you're a child of God and you're trying to walk with him and you're thinking about not because your husband or your wife or your parents or your children or your siblings or your coworkers or your boss or whoever it is putting pressure on you. Don't give up. And if you're not a Christian yet, don't give up on your path toward Jesus Christ because you fear what lies on the other side. Don't give up when you mess up, when you're beaten up. When you're fed up, number 3, when you're fed up, don't quit. Don't give up when you're fed up. The story of Elijah in 1 Kings 18 and 19. Remember the story of Elijah? Elijah was a prophet of God during tough times. That would have been hard to be a preacher back then because there weren't too many of them running around there willing to preach what he was preaching. And God's people were divided, and many of them had gone off and worshiping other gods. And the king of Israel at that time was Ahab, and the queen was Jezebel, and about the most wicked married couple you'd ever hope not to find. Finally, Elijah confronted God sent him to the top of Mount Carmel, and he had this confrontation. Remember the story? And the prophets of Baal. Baal was a false god. The prophets of Baal tried to call down fire from their God, and Baal couldn't deliver because Baal wasn't there. And then Elijah called down fire from his God, Jehovah God. And God sent down that fire, and it consumed the altar and the water and everything that was around it. It was a great victory for Elijah. That's at Mount Carmel. Geographically pretty high. But now I'm getting to a point here. Stay with me. He came down off the mountain. And that's chapter 18. Chapter 19, he comes down off the mountain, and he hears immediately that Jezebel is very unhappy with what he's done. And Jezebel is not somebody you want to be unhappy with you. And she's going to try to kill him. And Elijah does what most of us brave, courageous men would have done. He runs for his life. I mean, he's at the top of Mount Carmel. Everything is good. Life is great. God's people are finally maybe coming around. And then he finds out that Jezebel, meanest woman who's ever lived, wants him dead. And he runs and he runs and he runs and he runs in the wilderness. A day's journey, falls under a juniper tree. And you remember his response in 1 Kings. He says, "Oh, Lord, take my life, for I alone am left. I am no better than my fathers. I am so sick of doing it." I'm paraphrasing. I'm so sick of this. I'm tired of this. God, just take me. God doesn't respond immediately. You go through the progression there in the chapter. God feeds him and gets some rest. And Elijah goes and makes another trip. And then he falls down again. He says, "Lord, I alone am left. And I'm no better than my fathers. Take my life. I'm done. I'm sick of this." Ultimately, God encourages him and says, "Elijah, I'm not done with you yet." And God has a place to use him. But I just think that story is pretty interesting from this perspective. There come times in life where you just want to quit because things aren't working out the way that you thought they would. When you're 18 years old, 19, 20, whatever, teenager, a lot of times we've all been there. Some of you are there now. Some of you are going to be there before too long. You have your life all mapped out, This is the way it's going to work. It's going to be really good. I'm going to go to college or whatever. I'm going to meet that special someone. It's going to be perfect. It's like the movies, It's going to be perfect. And we'll get married and have a job and we'll have plenty of money always, and we'll have the perfect American dream of a family with 2 kids and a fenced-in backyard and a dog and a cat, or whatever your dream is. Mine doesn't have the dog or the cat, but you know, this is the way it's going to be. The marriage is going to be perfect. The kids are always going to obey, and they're never going to roll their eyes, and they'll always be yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir kind of kids, make perfect grades and all that. Everything will be wonderful, and we'll have plenty of money, and we'll retire early, and we'll bounce our grandkids on our lap, and then we'll have plenty of money in our nest egg retirement deal, and then we'll pass away at the ripe old age of whatever, you know, fill in the blank. I mean, we have our dreams. You know, there's nothing wrong with dreams. We ought to dream. But the only thing about it is sometimes those dreams don't come true. You know? Sometimes they don't work out that way. And some of you, I know, you know that quite well. Marriages sometimes fall apart. Kids don't always obey. Sometimes they rebel. Jobs don't always happen the way you want them to. Economies don't always go straight up. The trajectory isn't always headed up, as we're finding out right now. The Dow Jones doesn't just head straight up, you know? And their health is not always the way we want it to be. And people get cancer before they're supposed to, if there's ever a time when you're supposed to. And heart disease, you know, things happen. And sometimes, maybe you're here tonight, and you're wondering, how can I become a Christian and serve a God who lets these things happen to me? You know? How can I do that? I think Elijah was in that boat. He was just, Lord, I've been faithful to you. I've been zealous for you, and you're letting all this happen to me? What in the world? Just let me quit. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. I'm going to quit. Some of you are Christians and thinking about quitting. Some of you aren't Christians and wondering, you know, if all these bad things in your life are drawing you away from God, or maybe pushing you toward God, or whatever, but don't give up when you're fed up. And you've been at the hospital. I've been at the hospitals. I've been at the funeral homes, you know, as you have. And I was at the hospital the other day, last Thursday in Birmingham, when the doctor came into the room, a young man, member of the church, a Christian who's 36, I think, 35, 36 years old, and the neurosurgeon, after looking at the MRI, said it's a brain tumor. I mean, you don't expect to hear that. 2 small kids. And you think, you know what, things like this aren't supposed to happen, right? Thing is, they do happen. And it's not that God wants them to happen, and it's not that God certainly takes pleasure in them happening, but it's a consequence of the fact that we live in a fallen world, and we live in a world that isn't the way God wanted it to be. We live in a world that is the way it is because God gives us free choice, free will, and people make bad choices sometimes, and sometimes we're just the result. We just reap the consequences of living in a world where there are cancers and there are heart diseases and there are all sorts of things, and people struggle and they suffer. But please don't think that God doesn't love you when those things happen.